Story 1. The Skinwalker. I don't consider myself to be a particularly superstitious person. That is to say, I get the occasional kick out of the horoscope, and my boyfriend and I like to humor the idea that spirits and poltergeists exist. We even joke about how we'd haunt people when we died and came back as ghosts. In fact, my boyfriend refuses to go anywhere near a Ouija board. Refuses to even think of it. Why even tempt it, he'd say. Why would you want to taunt evil ghosts like that? Ghosts never play fair, and if you piss one off, you're screwed. I don't think he was ever serious. Just precautionary. But maybe he was right. God, this all happened so recently, I'm still shaken. Can barely write about it now without my nerves acting up. Okay, here it goes. A few weeks ago, my mom, sister, and I went to Colorado for an entire week of vacation. We were going to drive all over the state, visit the national parks and go horseback riding and whitewater rafting and so much more. I was excited. And I sorely needed a break from work, anyway. We drove a grueling 16 hours out there, and spent our first day rafting down the rivers. After an extremely wet but exhilarating day, we drove to a ranch house to go horseback riding. We arrived at sunset, so it was too late to do anything, but we had all next day to ride the trails and see the sights. The ranch was dumpy, to put it nicely. It was all run down with scraps of steel everywhere, and the shoddy lodging cabins were in desperate need for repair. I swear the roof over our shack of a cabin was a giant piece of drywall with shingles stapled to the top. My sister and I thoroughly checked the place for spiders and bugs before we even thought of bringing our luggage inside. It was only for the night, I reassured myself. Just one night in a dumpy shack on a rock-hard bed that probably had bed bugs under the sheets. I shuddered at the thought. My mom tried to cheer us up. She had brought skewers and a pack of hot dogs to roast over the communal fire pit. Happy to get out of the shack, my sister and I made a nice cozy fire, and soon a few other visitors came out to sit around the fire and roast s'mores and share stories. We talked about where we were from, where we were going, and all our adventures along the way. Pretty soon the stories turned into tall tales and urban legends and the sort of stuff you'd usually tell around a bonfire. That's when I spoke up. I loved stories, especially scary ones. And hey, we're out west, we're in Native American territory, why not liven the place up with my favorite local myth, the legend of the Skinwalkers. Now, for the uninitiated, Skinwalkers are very evil, very dangerous beings. They were humans who gained the ability to take on the form of an animal by wearing its pelt, usually through very dark and taboo magic. I knew all this, and told my story. Who doesn't love a good ghost story, after all? Everyone seemed to be enjoying it. I admit I took some creative liberties, really just retold an old werewolf story, but with a skinwalker as the monster instead. I improvised a lot of the story and added a few things that weren't in the mythos at all. I gave our beloved frightening skinwalker wide, crazed eyes with pinpoints for pupils with a matching insane smile. I made the skinwalker horribly misshapen, swollen joints and arms that were too long and legs that were too short and a head that never sat straight on its shoulders. I made it as terrifying as I could imagine. No one minded. They actually really liked it. A man from Kentucky admitted the visuals alone were enough to creep him out. Victory in my book, if you ask me. And once I was done, everyone decided it was getting really late. Our firewood was dwindling and it was as good a time as any to turn in for the night. We packed up our skewers and s'mores, doused the fire, and headed to our little shacks. I tossed and turned a lot trying to fall asleep. I couldn't get comfortable on that damn bed. A rock was probably cozier than that mattress. So against my better judgment, I got out of bed, and walked about the cabin. I reasoned that if I stayed up late enough, I would be so tired that I would fall asleep no matter what I was laying on. I think I briefly contemplated sleeping on the floor. I wasn't that desperate yet. It was pitch black outside. No lights from any nearby street lamps, no car headlights, hell, not even the cabin lights were on. And I don't remember seeing a single star. It was a bit creepy, but I shrugged off the shiver creeping up my back as simply the cold tile floor beneath my feet. I did, however, find it odd there weren't any lights on at all on the property. You'd think there'd be a floodlight on the horse stables or in the main office, but no, nothing. That was really weird. I stepped outside in my flimsy foam flip-flops to get a better look. I could barely make out the ranch. And for some stupid reason I decided to go walking around. Eventually my eyes adjusted where I could see well enough to navigate. I paced up and down the road where the cabins sat and then circled around to the fenced-in field where the horses were out grazing. Except there weren't any horses. Probably in the stables for the night, I reasoned. I shivered again. It was getting cold. I turned around to head back to my own cabin. It was stupid of me to be out all alone at an obscene hour, I had realized. I needed to get to bed. But when I turned, there was something in the middle of the road. Its shape was swallowed up by the surrounding darkness, I could barely make it out. But whatever it was tall and thin. I shrugged it off as just a pole or something else and kept walking, but then it moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat and I could barely breathe. I just imagined that, I said. I just imagined it, I'm freaking myself out, get your fucking head straight. It moved again. My paralyzed throat managed to squeak out a pathetically weak whimper as my legs began to lose strength. I shivered violently against a cold that was building up inside of me. My eyes began to focus on the impossibly dark figure standing against a barely visible sleek gray night. Now I could see it. It was a person, but like nothing I had ever seen before. Its arms were impossibly long. Its legs impossibly short. It had a torso far too long for its rail-thin body and a head much too big for its pencil-thin neck. Its right arm was sticking out to its side, swinging up and down. Its blockish head, rolled onto its left shoulder, jerkily twitched up and down, up and down. It didn't move other than that, just stood there, twitching, arms jerking up and down, head lolling around its shoulder. I still stood there like the dumbfuck I was. My cabin was a few hundred yards behind that thing. And I wasn't so stupid as to try to walk past it. My only option was to go around, behind the cabins and the stables and hope it didn't see me. I forced myself to lift my foot off the ground to step backwards. My flip-flop made a loud wet smacking sound as it cracked against my foot and I immediately froze in horror. The thing stopped too. It stood there perfectly straight, perfectly still, listening. I stayed as still as I could. My breath was shallow and panicked and I tried to force myself to slow my breathing before I started wheezing. My heart thundered in my chest, my whole body was shaking. But I didn't move. Neither did it. I began to slowly, so goddamn slowly, bend over and slipped my feet out of those fucking flip-flops. My feet touched the dirt and the crumbly gravel, but at least now I could move silently. I spared a quick glance to the side to see where I was going. 2 cabins were immediately to my right. I could slip between them with ease, disappear out of sight. I only looked away for a second. When I turned back, that fucking thing was gone. It was fucking gone, it fucking knew I was there, it was coming for me, oh fuck. Yet I still couldn't fucking move. I was paralyzed, I couldn't move no matter how loud my head screamed run 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 UFUCK, run. I heard something behind me. I turned instinctively, even though I knew fucking better I still turned the fuck around. I was greeted with 2 bulging eyes, oh fuck, its eyes. Staring at me unblinking with 2 black pinholes for pupils and an insane smile that was stretched far too wide to be anything remotely human. My paralysis broke as I stared at that fucking thing. I fucking ran, crying my eyes out, trying to scream but a horrible lead weight in my throat silenced me. My feet pounded on the dirt, I stomped over anything in my way. I trampled over a jagged rock, slicing my foot wide open. I ignored the pain, I ignored my body screaming in agony, I ignored my own blood pouring from the wound, I didn't care, I just ran. I felt the cold creeping up my back, oh God, that cold. It was sinking right into my bones. I couldn't stop shaking or sobbing, and I didn't stop running until I burst into the cabin. I slammed the door shut, dead-bolted the lock and leaped into my bed. I huddled under the blankets, hiding my head, and there I gasped and shook for breath. And I waited. I didn't sleep that entire night. I was too scared, I couldn't get rid of that chill. All I thought about was that thing, standing there and twitching. Morning finally broke and I finally allowed breath of relief. Whatever I had seen had not come for me, and now that it was light it could no longer take me by surprise. My mom noticed my bleeding foot and the blood I tracked through the cabin. I shrugged it off, said I cut myself the night before when we were making s'mores. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push it. We left not long after that. And as we left, I looked at the place where that thing once stood and I shuddered again. But there was nothing. I assured myself, there was nothing. We said goodbye to the ranchers and to our companions, and I noticed the man from Kentucky who said had thoroughly enjoyed my story. He told me again how much he liked it. Said he was going to tell it to his own kids when he got home. They really liked scary stories, he said. And as we drove away, his head rolled onto his left shoulder, and he smiled a wide, insane smile as he waved us goodbye. Story 2. My Skinwalker experience. My day started off pretty normal. At 6:30 my alarm woke me up and I proceeded with my normal routine such as, I showered, brushed my teeth and threw my hiking gear on. I'm a pretty avid hiker, wouldn't say very experienced but I know what I'm doing, so I go every weekend when I can. Around 7:30 that was when I was ready to drive to my chosen hiking route, Basalt Mountain, Colorado. This was about a 3-hour drive from where I live, so I was pretty exhausted by the time I got there after being up so early. The hike started off great, the sun was beaming down on me and I could hear all the birds singing and all the critters running around in the forests. Along my route that I chose, there was gorgeous views and amazing scenery, so I stopped whenever I could to take in the views and just live in the moment. A few times I stopped to make myself a coffee and to take some stunning photos for my friends back home in the UK, however, by the time I got to the top I realized it was getting dark. This is when I noticed I was walking back in the dark. This is where it started to get creepy. On my way back down I had a sharp feeling on the back of my head. Like someone was watching me. I chose to ignore it and carried on walking. The thing is though, the more I walked and the darker it got, the feeling kept getting more intense. In an act to distract myself I whistled the tune to my favorite song. This is when I could hear someone walk behind me in the distance, but not too far to not hear them. Too far to see them though. I kept glancing behind me and kept seeing nothing, looked to my left and right and still nothing. As I kept on walking I could still hear it following me and that sharp feeling of being watched was getting unbearable. About 40 minutes has passed since setting off back down and I didn't notice whatever was following has been slowly getting closer. I realized this when I looked behind me, about the 100th time, and this time I saw a deer. This wasn't a normal deer either. This deer looked like if it was dead, but somehow still alive. It had red glowing eyes locked right onto me, its skin all patchy and some of it hanging off too. Bones were sticking out off its limbs and chest, blood also dripping from its mouth. It just wasn't natural. By time it sunk into what I was looking at it started walking to me at a fast pace. That ain't normal either I thought. Then it hit me. I'm gonna die if I don't run. I flung my body around and started sprinting for my life, with every ounce of energy I had. That's when I heard it. That shrill scream from behind. Sounded half human, half coyote. The human half sounded like a death scream. It sent chills down my spine and my shit into my pants. Footsteps were getting faster and closer behind me, but I kept on pushing. My legs were burning and my lungs screaming. I wanted to quit. That's when it was close enough I could hear it grunting. I was shitting myself. After running for what felt like an eternity later, I built up the courage to look over my shoulder. This was a mistake. What I saw was no longer a deer. What I was looking at was roughly 7 foot tall, it had abnormally long limbs and it was insanely skinny with barely any muscle on its frame. What skin it had was gray and hanging from its limbs and torso, just like the deer. Some of it was human skin, some of it was animal skin. From what I could make out, the animal skin could have been from a deer or even a coyote. What creeped me out the most was its face, well, lack of. 2 hollow and black pits replaced the eyes and it had a gaping mouth with bloody razor-sharp teeth. Panic truly set in. Then I heard the scream again. At the same time it swiftly swung its dangly arm at me, which had pointy sharp long fingers attached at the end of it. Ducking out the way of its arm, it managed to tear a chunk of flesh from my right shoulder. Blinding with pain, I tripped and fell down an embankment. Rolling down it, I missed a few trees but smashed into one of them. Winded, I feebly tried getting up, but to no avail. This was useless. My ankle was severely sprained and I had no strength to get myself up off the ground. In a desperate attempt, I dragged myself into a bush so it couldn't see me. It was pitch black at this point. Rummaging around in my backpack like a madman, I clung onto my knife. Laying there in agonizing pain and wheezing, I could hear it grunting, walking around looking for me. I was shaking uncontrollably. I thought I was gonna die. After laying in the bush for what felt like hours, listening to it patrol the area around me and grunting, I had a moment of stupidity. Looking out of the bush, I no longer saw the 7-foot figure, I saw the silhouette of a deer feet away from me. With every ounce of courage and energy I had, I leapt out of the bush, throwing my body and my knife at the deer. Driving my knife into its skull, I could hear the crunching of the bone and the squelching of flesh, and a viscous liquid cover my hand. At the same time, an inhuman scream, similar to the screams before that, came from the deer. The deer fell limp and so did my body next to it. Hoping I killed it and it's not gonna kill me, I passed out from exhaustion. Waking up hours later with the sun beaming down on my face with its warm rays, I realized I was still alive. However, the deer must be as well. Getting up and looking around, there was no sight of the deer nor my knife, just a blood trail going back to where I was running from. Then I heard the same scream again from the same direction. Panic rushing my body again, I sprinted down the trail, still hearing the same scream over and over, getting closer, and getting back to my car, throwing myself into it and sped to the closest hospital. That's the day I truly believed skinwalkers are real, and I managed to survive. Somehow. Story 3. Smiling Skinwalker. I've had a draft of this story set up for a while, but I've been too worried and scared to tell. It made me question everything. My faith, my eyes, my sanity. I've decided it's time to finally let others know about what I've experienced, as it may help me move on. At least that's what I hope. I recently moved westward to Arizona from the boring state of Oklahoma. I am a devout Christian, and never once before this had I believed there were entities in existence that we couldn't hunt down with our modern advancements. It's 2019, for heaven's sake. You'd figure if we wanted to find something, we would, and most of all, we could. It was the 23rd of December, 2018. I was in Payson, Arizona, a bit north of Phoenix. My friends and I, in our Christmas spirit, decided to head out north of town, about 5 to 6 miles or so into the forest on a secluded trail. It was cold that night. Some of my friends shivered and displayed obvious signs of unpreparedness. I was layered fairly well, and yet the winds and frigid cold punctured through my layers and onto me. We wanted to make a bonfire, warm up, enjoy ourselves, and a few drinks. I knew as soon as I got into the car to head that way, something was off. I felt sick, uneasy, and something in my gut told me to just stay home. But I couldn't put my finger on just what, and ignored my ever so looming feelings of anxiety. We picked up friends and headed to the trail. I'm a huge nature lover, and always felt safe in the confines of the forest, I felt in control, at ease. But not tonight. It may sound cliché, but I'll be damned if it didn't feel like someone, or something was watching me when we finally got there. And when I had gotten far enough down the trail that turning back would be no hasty endeavor, it finally hit me why I felt so eerie. That same year, during the weeks prior to Thanksgiving, I was here before. It's not a spot we usually go to, therefore I was not familiar with it, nor were my friends. We were coming out for the same reason we were in December, for a few drinks around a bonfire. It was late. I, however, hadn't had any spirits that night. It was my job to gather firewood. I didn't mind, my chance to survey and explore the area around us wouldn't be bad. Before I even left our area, things took a turn for the strange. I was at the edge of the light being cast from the small bonfire I was to gather more fuel for. In the faint glow of the far trees, I caught glimpse of something dark behind a tall pine. I asked backwards to my friends if it was out of the ordinary for people to be hanging around this spot. My query was only met with silence from them, as they drank on. I took a few more steps beyond the comfort of the blaze, keeping my eyes affixed on the tall shadowy figure fixated behind the tall trees. I could faintly make out that it had moved in a slight bobbing motion, like a buoy upon a tide. My immediate thoughts drew a blank as to why someone would be out here doing this. Maybe I was seeing things, or it was a prank of some sort. I opened my mouth to call out, or even crack a joke, but was mortified when I realized I could not speak. Something inside of me prevented me of making any noise. My heart raced. As it swiftly came, it shot off into the distance like a bullet. Being startled so badly, I fell back onto the ground and kicked myself back like a spooked animal, scratching and cutting my hands as I do so. My friends saw me and laughed, thinking I was drunk. I managed to stammer out a line to what I saw, but was only met with a few blank stares and laughs, making me sound stupid. For the rest of the night, I never dared step away from the beams of the bonfire. As I walked down that trail that frigid December evening, I remember what I had seen and felt on that cold November night, and my stomach dropped. My friends were slurring out Christmas carols and other drunk epiphanies. I know they wouldn't listen to me even if I spoke out, so I ignored the guttural feelings, prayed for the best and walked on. I hadn't been drinking much this night either. I don't enjoy alcohol as much as my friends, and often I was the one responsible for hurting them home when the night was over. However, to calm my tense nerves, I had a drink or two from some Jaeger we had chilled in the ice chest. It was Christmas after all. It worked. We were all having a good time, enjoying our festive feelings and generally savoring the crisp forest atmosphere. Soon, nature called, and forgetting my prior ordeal, I began to walk away from the fire to relieve myself. I walked a fair 300 or so feet away towards a big rock resting behind some fallen trees, not wanting to be seen doing my business. I was not even far enough away from the fire to not be able to hear my friends' voices echoing through the woodlands. From behind me, my friend Corbin, who had come along, called out my name. I'll admit, I was tipsy, but nowhere near enough to not differentiate reality from a drunken stupor. I remember calling out to him, telling him to give me a moment to finish. I zipped up and turned to walk around the rock to where I heard him wonder to. I don't know what it was, but sure as all heaven above and hell below was not Corbin. It took me a minute for my woozy mind to put this together and stop walking towards it. I am thankful I did. This being stood tall, at least 6 to 7 feet. Its eyes burned like our fire. It moved from a dog-like four-limb position to standing tall. The light from the moon on this cold night radiated the body, showing off its dark slender shape with an inhumane sheen. I began to sob. Violently. My mind ran in panicked circles. Seconds felt like lifetimes as my world ground to a halt at the clawed feet of the beast that I was sure was going to take my life from me right then and there. I did the only thing I could think to do. I dropped to my knees and began to pray. This monster to my petrified brain had to have been the devil himself. To imagine him anything worse than it would be impossible. It did not like my pleas to God. An unholy shriek of what I can only think to describe as someone screaming loudly with lungs full of water rang out. I screamed in terror and with all the strength I could muster, lunged backwards across the forest floor, running as fast as my legs could take me. I fell a few times. I think, in sheer panic. I just couldn't manage to get my body to work properly knowing that thing was near. When I returned in a panicked craze to the fire, covered in sweat, dirt and tears, I managed to wheeze out what happened somewhat through my sobs of fear. I could tell they doubted whether or not what I was desperately stammering out was real or not. I think I was so horrified in that moment that I had a small seizure, because everything else is a blur. I remember going to the truck, leaving. I remember waking up the next day receiving a multitude of texts saying I was either stupid and crazy, or texts from worried friends asking if I was okay. And I also remember the last I saw of the thing before I made my frenzied flee. When it smiled back at me through the forest and skittered off into the darkness. A few days after Christmas, I was able to get in touch with a native elder here in town. I was so scared mentioning the event because I was worried of being mocked or him not believing me. To a twist of my thinking, I told him very vividly what I had encountered. He wholeheartedly believed and told me it was a skinwalker. He then blessed me thoroughly and told me to leave that stretch of land alone and to never venture out there again. Next time I might not be so lucky. He didn't have to tell me twice. I know I sound crazy. If I were you, I wouldn't believe me either. But you don't have to. All you have to know is, for the love of God above and all things holy, never forget that we are not alone on this earth. Sometimes during the night, whenever I look out my window, I catch sight of eyes in the trees looking back at me. I am still horrified. Story 4. Don't visit the Appalachians. I don't like to use the term skinwalker to describe the hellspawn that wander the Appalachian mountains. I say this because the only people that believe in skinwalkers are the ones who have actually seen them. I sure as hell didn't believe in any such thing until about 2 weeks ago. The Appalachian Mountains had always been a place that I wanted to visit. The pictures on Google were enough for me. The place is fucking beautiful. I had heard a few stories about skinwalkers roaming around the mountains during the night, which just made it all the more interesting. So, I saved up some money, rented a cabin, and flew out here to experience the mountain lifestyle for a couple of weeks. The first few days were completely normal. I had gotten settled in and felt completely fine. Hiking some surrounding trails is all that I can recall for the first 3 or 4 days. It was on that 5th day that everything began going to shit. The cabin that I had rented had 2 big floodlights facing the backyard. Every night a coyote would walk past my cabin, causing the lights to turn on. I thought nothing of it. It was honestly kinda cute. On the 5th night of my stay, I was sitting in the living room watching some satellite TV. In the corner of my eye, I saw the floodlights flick on. I jumped up to go see my new coyote friend through the window. Let's just say that whatever caused my floodlights to turn on that night was not a fucking coyote. Its body looked completely normal except for the legs. The legs were extremely long and skinny, probably 3 times longer than any normal coyote. The thing just stared at me. My fight or flight didn't kick in, all I could do was stare back into its empty eyes. This fucking creature then let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard, then got even closer to the window. I turned around to grab my phone so I could call the police. As I was walking to the couch, the floodlights turned off. The soft glow of the old TV screen was the only thing lighting the living room. I grabbed my phone and sprinted upstairs to my room. My first instinct was to hide in the closet, so I did just that. The closet doors had little slits in them so I could kinda see what was going on outside. I picked up my phone and tried to call the police. There was one slight problem though. My phone was fucking dead. It was around this point that I heard knocking coming from my front door. The knocking continued for what felt like an hour. I literally had no idea what to do, so I just sat there, hoping that it would stop. It eventually did stop, but shortly after, I heard the door open. No kicking the door in or anything, it just opened. I started to cry. I could hear faint footsteps getting louder and faster as it went up the stairs. It eventually got to my room, where I thought I was dead for sure. I could hear it opening drawers and messing with my bed sheets. I peered through one of the slits in the door, but I couldn't really see anything. That was until the creature put its disgusting, rotting face right up against the door. It was breathing so loudly that it was hurting my ears. I pushed myself back into a corner and used one of my jackets to cover me. It was my last option. I don't know how long I sat there, but it felt like an eternity. I eventually peeked out from behind my jacket to see some light coming through the doors. I stood up and looked out. It was daytime. I couldn't hear the creature anymore. I assumed that it got spooked by the sunlight and left. I slowly opened my closet door. It was finally safe. Needless to say, I got the fuck out of there, and I'm never going back. I don't want to see a therapist because they won't believe me. They'll think I'm insane. Maybe I am insane, I don't know. All I know is that whenever the locals of the Appalachian Mountains talk about these things, they aren't lying. Story 5. Don't hide from cryptids in Alaska, they're worse here. I've lived in Alaska my entire life. I live in one of the more populated parts of the state. I won't fully disclose for my safety. Though, I've seen a lot of things, and I'm not even very old. I've seen damn near everything AK had to offer. Well, I thought I had anyway. Turns out, cryptids are a lot more angry up here. We have the classic Sasquatch, otter people, dog men, serpents, our own version of the boogeyman, wendigos, and even skinwalkers, believe it or not. I've had the displeasure of being hunted by 2 of these. Take a wild guess. It started when I was at my friend's house, us sitting at the ridge on the border of their property. Where we sat had a trail leading up, and a light pole. It was around 11 at night, but Alaska winters get dark. We were sat under the yellow light from the pole, when I heard a branch snap and snow crunch. I assumed it was a moose, so I told my friend to keep their eye out. They nodded and we continued to talk. A few minutes later, the snow crunched again and I felt my heart freeze. Now I'm a pretty paranoid person, but this was well before it had really taken effect. I'm still unsure which of the 2 cryptids it was, but it had infrasound. Infrasound is something big cats and other predators use to activate a prey's fight or flight. Usually ending up in the prey freezing. According to whatever the predator was, I was its next meal. I grabbed my friend by the hood when I stood up and ran down the trail, pulling them along with me. They groaned in protest and confusion until I told them something was wrong. We ended up going inside that night and I didn't get a wink of sleep. I was too afraid of what was waiting outside. Fast forward to a few months later, it was July, I was sat with my window open and writing on my computer. I was home alone as I often am, but that didn't bother me. As I typed on my laptop, I felt something strange. That intense feeling of being watched. I tried to ignore it, but it overtook my body. I looked out the window to the edge of my driveway, next to the pond, and there it stood. A pale gray, malnourished, disgusting-looking creature. Sunken in eyes, slightly protruding teeth, and on all fours nonetheless. Though, this creature had a human-like body, aside from the twisted appendages. I froze in my spot when it caught my eye. I shoved my computer away from me and got up to crank in my window. Once my window started moving, so did it. Inching closer to my home with lanky, broken-looking legs. I wound my window up enough, flipped the lock and pulled down my curtain. That was the first night I had ever spent cowering in my bathtub with a pocket knife and a blanket. I hadn't seen the creature again until later in the year, winter. I was taking the garbage down to the end of my driveway when I heard the inhuman growling. It sounded like a dog had smoked 20 packs a day and tried to growl at me. I wasn't taking any chances and sprinted up to my porch, slamming open my door and locking every lock. My mom looked mortified, as was I. This happened on a few separate occasions, but this wasn't even all of it. I would walk to the bus stop in the mornings, so obviously this could be an issue. One morning, my cat, Fergus, had followed me down to the bus stop. I was petting him as I stood next to a stop sign. Now, Fergus is the sweetest cat I have ever met. He didn't bat an eye at dogs, moose, other cats, nothing. He was a badass and a sweetheart in one cat. Imagine my surprise when he spun around, arched his back and started hissing and spluttering. I was horrified. This beefed-up Maine Coon cat was hissing into the darkness at 6 in the morning. Thankfully, the bus had come to my aid and I got on immediately. Fergus passed away recently, so I'm a little nervous about not having that warning next time. Now these next few experiences all happened in the span of a week. It started with me, sitting in my living room watching some show, when I heard something on the porch. This was before I had a security system so I couldn't really see it. There's a small, obscure window at the top of my door, but I'm just shy of tall enough to see out it. So I had to go by sound. I slowly crept around my house, making sure each door and window was locked up. I hurried my dog into my parents' room and into the bathroom. He likes hiding in the shower so he didn't really mind. Though, when he started snarling, which he never does, I almost started sobbing. The layout of my parents' room is you walk in, there's their bed, 2 windows on either side of the bed, and the bathroom next to one of the windows. My mom put the spare mattress we had up in front of that window. I hadn't locked it. I frantically dialed up my mom's number and called her quietly, while hugging my dog. I was crying. She ended up coming home a few minutes later. When she went to get me out of her bathroom, there were scratch marks on the wall. Something had tried to get in. This was when my paranoia spell started. I would frequently have episodes of pure irrational fear, usually ending in me sleeping in my bathroom. A few times, like this one, it was warranted. I was once again, sitting in my living room watching a show, when I heard something in the carport. The wall behind me was the one connecting to said carport. I got up, walked closer to the TV and turned it down, listening to each thudding step of the thing outside. I began to shake, and spiral into a panic attack. It slammed on one of the walls and I booked it to my bathroom. I locked myself inside with my knife, phone and charger. I wasn't prepared to hear it behind me, through the wall to my backyard. The only way to get in is hop the fence, unhinge the door or crawl over the mass of boxes blocking off the back porch. I didn't care which it had done, but I was mortified nonetheless. This thing had definitely known where I was in the house. Eventually, it stopped and must have left, so I left the cramped room to check on my dog. He was fine, though shaken. The last time I had seen it, had by far been the worst. I haven't had near as close of an experience since. I was on a Discord call with my friends, eating food and chilling in my kitchen. I was having a good time when I had the overwhelming feeling I was being watched. I knew exactly what it was, so I looked down to the bottom corner of my back door. My back door has a wide window encompassing pretty much the entirety of it, with a curtain that it came with. Peeking out from the sliver of room the curtain left, was sunken in eyes and gray skin. It was staring up at me. I grabbed my phone and ran to the bathroom for safety once more. After not hearing it for a while and having my friends calm me down, I went to my room. I knew the window was locked and closed, I felt a little bit safer there. Boy was I wrong. I had been halfway asleep when I heard ungodly scratching at my window. I was obviously confused and scared at the sound. When I peeled back my curtain, I was faced with that ungodly thing, with its fingers protruding through the window. I dropped the curtain and ran to my parents' room into the crawl space in their closet. Knowing this thing couldn't find me there. I had closed the door to the room itself and the closet on my way in. When I heard the mattress blocking my parents' window fall, careening onto their bed. with terrible scratching and snarling. I heard my dog going crazy outside the door. This disgusting thing was stalking around my parents' room looking for me. I heard each deliberate step, each gruff and breath of air. I was frozen on the ladder of the crawl space. I hadn't even turned the light on, which would be my saving grace. I heard the closet door whine as it was opened. This thing could open doors. It sniffed around my parents' clothes. I heard it step on the slab of wood keeping me hidden. I don't know how it didn't find me, maybe it was the smell of the carpet, but it eventually booked it and left. I stayed down there almost the entirety of the night until I heard my mom come home. That was the last time she left me home alone late at night, especially during winter.